Awesome. On this episode of the Teachers of Boxing, we have the Hall of Fame trainer Orlando Cuellar. Orlando, it's great to have you here today. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing very good. Thank you for having me. Very good.
Awesome. So, the way that we typically do this, I go into all the ins and outs of training. I love to know your backstory and your history. The most exciting thing that I see from your history, of course, is that when you started training in Miami when you were younger, you trained at the Fifth Street Gym. Obviously, the name speaks for itself. We know the history of the Dundies and of Muhammad Ali, formerly Cassius Clay, when he first started training there. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, sure. I made it to the Fifth Street Gym actually through my father. My father, I told him I wanted to try boxing, and he had mentioned to me that he would play dominoes. Being Cuban, we love dominoes, so he was playing dominoes on every Friday night with his friends. And he says to me, he says, there's a gentleman that plays dominoes with me that was a manager in Cuba, and here he's a trainer, Fernando Balido. I didn't know who Balido was at the time, but later on I found out that Fernando Balido was the manager of Kid Gavlan, the famous bolo punch fighter from Cuba, champion. And he says to me, my father says to me, come on Friday night, and I'll introduce you to him. So I went over there, introduced me to him. Fernando Balido says to me, can you make it? It was on a Friday night, so he says Saturday tomorrow. Can you make it to Fifth Street Gym at 10 o'clock in the morning? I said, yeah, absolutely. So when I got there, it was for me. I always, I watched all of Cassius Clay, which later on changed the name to Muhammad Ali. But I watched all of Muhammad Ali's fights on TV. I think it was on ABC, Wide World of Sports, if I'm not wrong. And it was like something, very special. Everybody watched, all of his fights because he was, very colorful. He was the first to be so, so talkative, and even though he was rapping to a degree, he was probably to me, I think he was the first rapper. But anyways, knowing who he was, as soon as the gym was on the second floor. The place was a coffee shop on the first floor, and then you go up the steps along the side of the coffee shop, and then up there is where the gym is. So as soon as I made my way up the steps, I heard Muhammad Ali speaking. He was talking to, he was sparring, and he was talking to one of the sparring partners. So I heard him, like he's, egging the sparring partner to bring it, this and that, or you ain't got this, or you ain't got that, or blah, blah. So I made my way up, and I was in awe of being there when Ali was sparring. That was my first time there, and it was an incredible experience. And I would train on Saturday mornings because I had school, and I didn't live so close to my B, so I would make the drive on Saturdays just to train at that gym on Saturdays at 10 o'clock in the morning. And there was Willie Pastrano, famous fighter, Vini Curto, Cuban and world champion Florentino Fernandez, and of course we had Angelo Dundee that was the trainer, and you had his brother Chris Dundee was also a manager and trainer. Back then we didn't have the Ali Act, the Ali Act where you can't be a manager. I mean, Chris was a manager and promoter. And back then you couldn't be a manager. Back then you could be a manager and promoter, but then the Ali Act came up, and you couldn't do that. But he was a promoter and a manager, and his brother was the trainer. And then there was Luis Soria, which was a masseuse and actually assistant to Angelo Dundee as a trainer. And he was more of a boxing, Cuban style of boxing technician, and that went very well because Ali did have similarities with the Cuban school of boxing, with the floating around and and scoring the points, and everything he did was very similar. So that was my first experience at the Fifth Street Gym, which forever I always kept it fresh in my mind. I could never forget all that I saw and learned there.
Yeah, and obviously it was, very just hearing you talk about it, it was a very impactful point in your life going into that gym. What do you think was the most the most influential thing or the thing that stuck with you most in your career, like all the way up till today?
Well, when I first experienced um, the professionals, the way they lived, how they I was in awe over everything they did. Just the way they came in, their demeanor, how they carried themselves, the outfits they put on, The brands that they were wearing was Ben Lee and Everlast. Um, Back then, I didn't know exactly what they were doing, and to a degree of how good or how great it was what they're doing, until I started getting into the ranks of real contenders and champions. That's when I was able to look back and say, uh-huh, that's why they did this, and that's why they did that. That's why they would, run before they would train, and then they would train and then go back and run again on the beach. And I realized that they were doing that to make weight, and they had a fight coming up. But back then, I couldn't put all of this together because it was too much to take in. I didn't have knowledge of it. Nobody really explained to me, how it all played out and what everybody was doing, because everybody was either coming off a fight, just maintenance training, or getting ready for a fight. So there was a lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts to this reality show that was playing
Yeah.
out right in front of my eyes. It was incredible. But later on, I found out, what everything led up to and why. Now, what's what stuck with me, or what stuck out with me, or what was able to be helpful to me was pretty much, you know, who they were. Not exactly the work they did, but who each character was, each personality was for that era, um, which there was three channels on TV. There was, of course, no cell phones, no computers. All they knew was fighting. Nobody was trying to be a rapper, a celebrity. It was just like this was where the ticket. This was their ticket out of the poorhouse. It was just
Yeah.
that the talk was all about boxing, and there was no women in sight. No women in sight. So it was just like a gritty, like workman-like. It was a raspy type of training atmosphere. These were tough guys. Not that they're not today, but this is all they did. This is all they did. And now, as boxing now is more technical, more commercial, more flashy. Back then, it wasn't. You had the smoker shows. You had fights that would be 15 rounds. Today they're 12. You had bleeders. Back then they didn't stop the fights because anybody was bleeding. There were bloodbaths.
Yeah.
Today, if you can't contain the fight, I mean the cut. If you can't contain the cut, they stop it. They stop the fight. So
Yeah.
back then, no, they didn't stop it because back then they didn't do it because there was too much riding on both guys. So it
Now,
was it was an incredible experience. And now I look back, I can just like see what that era was.
is there a part of that era that when you're training now, or more modern times, that you try to maintain? Like you saying, like, hey, they weren't rappers back then. It's a good observation. I think social media with fighters, they're so worried about how they come across, and this is what I'm doing here, and this is who I'm hanging out with.
Well, they need
They,
content to get followers and likes, and then the more followers you have, the more popular you are. So basically, they have teams sometimes behind them that are doing all this work, and they're like a reality part of a reality show, but they're fighters also. It
yep.
was different.
Now, when you're in training camp, though, if you have a guy who's getting ready for a fight, are there certain ground rules of like, hey, no, I'll just give examples like the old days, like, hey, no women around the gym, no, no messing around, whatever it is. Like, are there certain ground rules that you'll keep in place to sort of maintain that professionalism?
Well, um, yes and no. If I feel that there's been cases where I've had a fighter show up to training camp until he got to know me with girlfriend or and other girls and couple of like a squad, and I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, but this is just for us. I need 100% focus. And that was far and few times. That wasn't something that happened. Usually when I train my fighters, I usually try to get a location where it's very private. It's only us in there, and very controlled, focused type of atmosphere where it's not just like anybody can walk up, anybody can start a conversation. I like when I'm training a fighter, I like to have his attention and I want him to have my attention. So that happened, but I think it might have been once or twice.
Gotcha. Now with that seclusion and that control, that's a theme I've heard a lot of times, and it's a big reason why a lot of trainers prefer to be like the Catskills or Big Bear in California. But also that control goes into like what does a fighter eat? How does a fighter condition? How does like being able to maintain all of that? And nowadays fighters have whole teams. How do you sort of maintain that control when there's and I guess Ali back in the day was like that too. He'd have a huge entourage and team. So how is it? What is that challenge of maintaining control, and how do you keep it when there are a lot of players involved in a training camp?
Well, back in the days, they didn't have nutritionists. They did have cooks that would bring into the training camp, and it was seclusion, and it was Big Bear was in Mexico or the Poconos, the mountains of the Poconos. So they had their cooks. Now, as far as nutritionists, they didn't have nutritionists. There wasn't strength and conditioners. The boxing coach pretty much did the strength and conditioning through the boxing routines and the boxing workouts. That was considered the strength and conditioning. We had the bars, we had push-ups, pull-ups, and dips, in which we thought that when you work with your own strength, that's good because when you fight somebody, they're going to be your own weight. So it was good for you to know your own weight and that strength. Um, and that worked out very good back then.
And when you
And, oh,
so
by the
like
way, my control, like you, no, wait a minute. Let me,
yeah,
excuse
yeah,
me if
go
I
ahead.
interrupt you. Well, you're
Yep,
asking
go
about
ahead.
my control. My control, I, when usually nowadays they'll bring in a strength and conditioner, and I like to know who the strength and conditioner is and how much work he's done and what has been the results of his work and who he's worked with. So I know to what degree that strength and conditioner, is going to be effective, with this fighter. Because I've also trained with some of the best strength and conditioners around the world. So I have my own experience and I know what fighters may need or may not need, and every fighter has different needs. So I take a look at the strength and conditioning, and if need be, I can suggest, without stepping on his toes, and suggest that we need a little bit more explosive work because I like to communicate and work with them closely. Let them know we need a little bit more explosive work. We need a little bit more gas, um, loose for the fighter to get a little more flexibility, elasticity. There's things that I'll go over with that strength and conditioner. And as far as control, I don't use the word control. I look at my position as overseeing. I oversee the strength and conditioning because when somebody's got to take the blame for a fight. It's the head trainer that's the first head that's gonna roll. Then you have the assistant trainer, then you have the strength and conditioner, then you have the nutritionist, everybody. But the first head to go because he's the experience, the one that has to be held accountable is the head trainer. So he has to supervise.
Yep.
And then, if need be, have a meeting if things are not going right with one of these individuals or one of these, experts. You have a meeting with them, and then you have a meeting with the manager, and if need be, the fighter also in some cases. And hey, we got this situation, we need to correct it, and then it either works or it doesn't work from there.
Absolutely. Well, it's kind of a big topic right now because there was a point in time where um, Eddie Reynoso was getting so much heat because so many of his fighters were popping for different performance enhancing drugs. But then he made a point on it that a lot of other trainers have said well before he made that point that if you have a nutritionist, you have to be very careful because you have to make sure they know exactly what they're doing because a lot of these supplements get mixed over in an overseas or in another place where the vat may have a banned substance and they're mixing protein in it and all of a sudden before you know it your fighter's taking it and getting trace amounts of whatever, but it's like it's too late and it's you want to trust a guy but it's like it has to be so tight and it's becoming more and more of a thing, where it's like you got to be so careful. Um, yeah. Sorry, I was just thinking about that because I just heard that somewhere else how like that's becoming like a big challenge nowadays.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, you have to, when you have these nutritionists, you have to make sure that, if they're high level nutritionists and, if you're an experimented, experienced trainer, You can talk to them and find out if they are following the ban, the bans that are in place, for certain things not to be used. VADA has a set of a sheet that tells you what is what's prohibited and what's not prohibited. So you can go by their rules of or restrictions that or things that you may or may not use, and you can read whatever the fighters being given, in the back of the labels, you could tell, and look up if that's, prohibited, if this is prohibited. So you have to read labels.
Yep.
You have to read labels. You just cannot, give a fighter anything because there's a lot of things that are prohibited.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, one thing about your process that's really cool is that it's sort of like when you're training a fighter for a fight, there's a sort of a curriculum in place. So instead of saying, hey, we're going to work on this over the next 8 weeks, you start with a foundation and then build from there. At least that's how I was understanding it. So when you start that process and look at what is going to be, week 1 and week 2, what do you first look at in the fighter to determine what the next steps are, or in his opponent for that matter?
Well, the first step is sometimes even before they come to training camp. I like for them to do, have a level of strength, conditioning, and gas, really before they even get to me. Now, once they get to me, the base is the conditioning. They got to have conditioning. First thing is platform. The first platform is conditioning. Then from conditioning, the next platform is bag work, pad work, all the drills that may be needed in order to bring them up to the next level, which is the third level would be sparring. Now, the sparring has to make it pretty basic, 4 different steps or levels of sparring. You start out with a third of the rounds for a few days or a week or two, depending how much time you got. Then you go to a few more rounds. Then the following week you go a few more rounds. That's my way of operating. And then you spar 3 days a week. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then, what I like my guys to do is, a month before the fight, if they're going to be a 12-round fighter, to go 1 month before the fight, 12 rounds, so I can see what it is that they may need or not need. And at that point, we can either add or subtract what we need. But pretty much that's it. It's conditioning first, then floor work, which consists of pad, heavy bag, and everything else. Then you have pads. And then after the sparring, then you have the 3 or 4 levels of sparring. Then a month before the fight, you run that full 12 rounds check. Sometimes, depending on who the opponent is, 3 or 4 sparring partners, which we rotate, in order to be able to, give our fighter the best possible test, a good run to see if anything's going to be loose, anything rattles, anything's out of place,
Yeah.
if we're going to blow a gasket or we're burning oil, or what are we doing? So we need to get that good run and see where he's at. And then we still have a month after that to correct things. And then, of course, a week before the fight, is a shakeout week, which you reduce intensity by 60%. And then we peak at fight night.
Gotcha. Now, you and I had talked about this before, and I was thinking about this when, let's say you have a fighter who, I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, because I saw Dillian White fight this weekend, and he was, unfortunately, it just wasn't his night, and it probably wouldn't be his night if they had that fight again and again. He was outmatched by a younger, more athletic guy. If you have a fighter who, when you look at it, you go, man, his odds are kind of slim in this one. He's the underdog. How do you approach that? Do you have to tell him very honestly, you're the underdog, this is going to be a tough fight, and we have, this might be our one chance if we fight it this way? Or how do you talk to that guy when his situation is such an underdog situation?
Well, if, look, I've, most of my career, I trained underdogs, just so you know. Most of my career was training underdogs. Being on the B side, winning fights we were supposed to lose, flipping the script, tampering with history, and turning the tables. So, you just know that, the referee, when you're on the B side, the referee is going for the other guy. In most cases, I mean, not to say that referees are dirty and nothing like that, but look, you have the favorite, you have the star, you have the guy that's supposed to win. Then you have the public, the commentators, everybody. You're a B-side opponent. You might have a few losses. You're not really supposed to. You're supposed to give the star, somewhat of a test or not. But it's just a matter of showcasing that star, and he's supposed to be so much better than the B-side, and that's why he's the star. So at that point, you gotta to train these guys for that. You gotta have a clinical eye. You have to really leave no stone unturned. You gotta cross your T's, dot your I's, make sure you're in tip-top supreme shape. You have the best of sparring, or recreate a similar type of fight, through sparring. So you're familiar with all the adjustments. You have to have adjustments in place. You have to know what could trip up the champion that you're fighting, and pretty much if you don't cut them so they stop the fight, if you don't jump on them so the referee stops the fight or the corner throws in the towel, you gotta knock him out. You
Yeah.
gotta really stop him to win. You gotta stop him to win because you're not supposed to win. You're not supposed to win. Everything is stacked against you. And at that point, if your training wasn't covering everything that I just mentioned and some, you know, you're gonna find yourself, coming up short, and you picked up a little payday, and that was it. That's back. You're back to the drawing board, and drop a few notches in the levels as far as competition. So, it's not easy fighting, from the B side or fighting, an A fighter that's a champion. You got to really, really train hard and smart, and that's pretty much my career. Even Glen Johnson as champions, we were still opponents.
Yeah.
Incredible. As champions, we're still opponents because you could be a champion, but then you're fighting fighters that are, mega champions.
Yeah.
Fighters that are, they might have fallen off, a little fall off, but then they're supposed to smash, the B side, and we were the B side. So that's how I did my career. So it's hard. It's very hard, but it's doable. It's realistic, and it does happen all the time. So for Dillian White, it was just a tough night against a very good force that's up and coming. This kid is a star. He's very young, I don't know, 20 years old. But I think that this kid could probably beat a lot of guys in the top 10 today.
Yeah, no credit from him at all. And he's also had so many great, really good fights. He's put it all out there, and I think he's just, he's a little bit older, and this kid was a lot younger, and it was just this
Yeah.
kid's time. There's no credit away from him. It's just I always wonder, like, how do you get a guy up for a test, Or I think of like, you think of the days of Mike Tyson, his first 15 opponents. Uh, Everybody watching is thinking, oh, they're about to get fed to the lions. As a trainer for a guy like that, going up against what feels so stacked, how do you get a guy's mind to pivot? How do you get him to be like the Buster Douglas, the one who's gonna like
Well,
stick up to him?
the way it works is before you even get to the fight. That has to be already the mind has to be already set. You like we had spoken before, you and I, about building their confidence through the sparring, through the strength and conditioning, through all the different tests that we give them, in the lab, with sparring partners, quality sparring partners. If he's going to fight one star, you bring in, if you have the deep pockets or you have the budget, you bring in, three other stars, and you pay them well to spar with them. That's how you get their mind right, their head where it's supposed to be, and believing that they can pull this off. You can build their confidence through sparring, through training, through, a lot of different things that we do to build confidence. And then they really believe that they can do it. And, because they've done the test and they've passed these tests, and they actually know that once it comes to the bell ringing for that fight, the first bell, that they can, from there on, they got this, they're good.
You're playing a game of you're playing on a razor's edge of essentially trying to get as close to that fire as possible without the fighter getting burned, right? I mean, you want him to get as close as possible without getting hurt, without maybe like shaking his confidence, and also like you said, the other trainer is a huge part of it because some trainers have egos. I've seen this happen before where they'll bring their fighter to spar and suddenly what you're expecting would be, like 75% turns into a firefight right off the bat because they want to make a statement or something like that. So you have to be watching a lot of things at one time.
Yeah, yeah, you have to be watching a lot of things. You have to look, you have to just like a fighter has to do a lot of things at once, a trainer has to do a lot of things at once, and he also has to look out for a lot of things at once, and he has to have, steps in his mind playing out, at the same time that all this is going on. And then you have guys that no, something related, but not exactly. You have a fighter that you might spar. You spar with the fighter, and then all of a sudden the guy's name comes up for a possible fight. And then, the fighter says, "Hey, I remember I sparred with him. I got the best of him. I got the best of him. Let's fight him." And then when you fight the guy, you realize that the guy just sparred, but he doesn't fight the way he sparred. He doesn't spar the way he fights. So now all of a sudden you're in a fight and you're getting your behind handed to you. You're like, what is this? Well, you gotta be careful. You gotta know all these things. You gotta do you gotta do a lot of research. You gotta do a lot of homework, in order to be able to get this working and make the right moves. It's chess. That's why we say it's chess, not checkers. But it's a dangerous game of chess.
It's a game, yeah, 100%. It's a game of chess, and I always say that even when people say like, "Oh, well, in the ring, it's a chess match." It's like, yes, it is, but with other layers to it. Like, if I were
Yeah.
to, take your queen, it's not gonna mess you up psychologically or put you on a survival
Right.
mode. You can still make clear
Hmm.
decisions. A fighter in the heat of the moment, and a trainer in the corner, you got to make decisions like that, and under sometimes a lot of pressure. And that's the point you made too about like looking at the next opponent. Was their sparring actually what it was perceived as, or is that just them, going at a certain pace? Were they maybe, planning it's sort of like a decoy for you to think that's what they are, so they could maybe get that fight in the future. My next question would be: you run a curriculum in training camp to get a guy ready from base level to being ready for this fight. How much is that fight to fight preparing him to grow as a fighter? What do you look for fight to fight to continue to grow? What does that picture look like? If you're starting a guy off, you get him at 5-0, and the plan is to get him up to 22-0 and fighting for a championship. Like, what does that path look like, fight to fight, and growing him and adding new levels to the game?
That's called the grooming process. That's referred to as the grooming process, and it's um it's it's similar to being a student in school when you're going through the grades, different first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade. Look at the grades as a fight. First grade, first fight. Second grade, second fight. So on and so forth. Then 12 fights. You're going to college, and then after that, that's it. You're what you studied is now that's your field. Now you're out there in the world. So everything you learn is going to come into play. Now the teacher has to know how the student's mind works, their ability to retain information, their dedication, their discipline. A teacher has to know the student's mind and know what the student wants to be or wants to accomplish. And based on that student's likes, desires, beliefs, the teacher has to give him a certain material for them to learn, for them to practice, and you check them on those lessons, those little tests you give them, and then there's going to be that one test where it's for the grade. They get graded, and the pro debut, they get graded, and so on and so forth. So that's the way it is. Now, change it a little bit. Now the teacher has an interest in this, picks a student. They have a lot of students in the classroom. So the teacher picks one student that they are told, pick one student, the one you believe that you're going to be able to make, to compete, with all the other students after 12 fights or 12th grade. And there, you say, well, I want this student. So that student, now you take him and you make sure you give him everything he needs. You move him, you talk to him, you teach him the lessons, you give him the test, and then you do the test. But the test you give him has to be a test that is just for him to get used to getting tested. So that then for the next test or the next fight, you show him a little bit more and you tell him, hey, the experience you had in this first fight, we're going to take it over into the next fight. Remember everything we did then? Now we're going to add to this and that. So you have to prepare their mind. You have to groom them in the sense that they know what they are, how this is moving along, how what's expected of them, and not to worry that it's only going to be one test at a time, and to trust the teacher because the teacher will get them ready. So now it's up to the teacher to make sure that they believe when they take a test or that they accomplish what the objective was, to make sure that you know math, English, science, whatever, biology, and you got them all right. You got them all good. Okay, now we're gonna a little bit harder test. It's a grooming process, and that doesn't stop. Now, once you get to becoming a champion or you have crossroads fight, then you can't pick who you put your fighter with, pretty much. I mean, you might have a choice of one or two names, but everything is hard from there on, and then that's it. The student is supposed to have matured, supposed to have passed all the tests, and if he hasn't, and you thought you got to a point where that student is not moving or got stuck, you got to take a step or two back and they reevaluate, reanalyze, analyze everything, and see what it is that needs to be corrected in order for us to go ahead and take those two steps forward. Oh, it's a hustle. It's
Yeah.
a hustle. It's an incredible hustle. But remember, it's a hustle against other hustlers, against other brains of fighting, other minds of boxing. It's incredible. It's like it's for me. It's very stimulating. It's very challenging, and this is what really gets me going. The challenge
It
at the best, trying
sounds
to compete with the best.
sounds thrilling. Now, take me through that. I mean, I've seen that happen where a fighter, we've seen fighters, they step up to a next level, and all of a sudden there seems to be a flaw in their game. And it's exposed just enough by a guy. They might win the fight, but it was exposed just enough that you're like, oh no, he can't keep going forward. He got hit with that right hand way too many times. He was dropping his left, whatever it is. What is a conversation after a fighter wins a fight, but it's like you have to take those two steps back? How do you approach that with the fighter to keep him moving forward and understanding, you're going to have to take a step back. We're going to have to rework on that.
Well, in most cases, the fighter at the end of the fight, uh, whether he won or not, but in this case, let's say he won, and there was a couple of he had a couple of hiccups. He stumbled a couple of times. At that time, he probably knows when he got hit with a shot that he just couldn't block, slip, or sidestep or back off from. He knows that that needs to be worked on. So, I don't talk to him like I think I mentioned it to you before. I don't talk to him right after the fight, the victory. No, that's it. That's it. I back off. I let him celebrate. The friends, the family, whatever. That's the thing. I give them that space, that time. They deserve it. They earned it. Then what we do is probably when we come back to the gym, then we have to sit down and we talk about we look at the film or not, and then we watch it together, and then that's when we go over it, and then I give them my take on what should be the proper steps moving forward, for them for us to work on.
Gotcha. And is there a specific way you deliver it, or it's just very much like business as usual? This is the next step. I mean, the expectation is set for them of how that conversation would go, right? I mean, I'd have to assume they'd know it's just going to be like an honest criticism and then move forward from there.
Yeah, yeah, it's business as usual. When I give them when we speak, when we have that little sit down, that could be anywhere. It could be ringside, right by our ring, where we train, or it could be in the car, in the morning picking them up, or having breakfast together or whatever. It could come up, and then I'll talk to them. But business as usual. Um, I don't believe in raising my voice. I don't do that because I deal with grown men. And I want the same respect that I give them, even though I know that when they come to me, or when I agree to train them, they know that they're with somebody that's experimented and knowledgeable, and and I can be a solution to a problem, or a continuation to something that's working in addition. So it's very businesslike, calm. The calmer I am, the better attention I get from them. So, and I also, it's very important for them to understand what I'm saying, and that we both have to be on the same page, because fighter and trainer have to be one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
so, and we kind of talked about this before. Obviously, the really tough part, fighter loses a big fight. or even just loses a fight, because any fight in boxing is a big fight. When you lose, it's treated as the end of the world by the media and by the public. But when a fighter does lose, you give him that space, and then what's the conversation from there?
Well, at that point, how did he lose the fight? How did he lose the fight? Did he lost the fight because it wasn't his night? Did he lose the fight because somebody was just, better than him? Did he lose the fight because he didn't, he wasn't there? Did he lose the fight because there could be so many different reasons why he lost the fight at that point? Um, if he lost the fight due to the fact that it was just he was off that night, and you got every trainer. I think trainers, at a high level know their fighter, and you know how they operate, how they work, how they think, what their social life is like. At that point, if they lost the fight because somebody was just, it wasn't their night, then you just, go back and tell them, hey, listen, I got your back. I got your back. This is nothing, the only way, the best way to erase a loss is with a victory. We're moving forward. That's it. This is what I saw, and what did you think? Blah blah blah. You talking? Kind of let them know that you have their back. That's after a loss, after a loss. And like I said, some fighters, if they didn't listen, like I had one fight that I remember, where everything was perfect, everything was great, going into the fight, and then the fighter, for whatever reason, wasn't paying attention. He wasn't executing the necessary adjustments at the time. And he just, I didn't know who I was talking. He wasn't, I had to ask him to look in my eyes, and it was just that he had some friends in the audience, in the crowd, that were giving him instructions. And everybody else was telling him to do something different. This is the craziest thing. And I picked up on it. I'm like, hey, look at me. Look at me.
Wow.
I need you to do what I'm telling you to do. I'm the one that trained you. I'm the one that came up with the fight strategy. It's me and you. We have to go home together.
Oof,
Listen to
that's
me.
a
Stop
bummer.
listening to everybody else. Listen to me and stop listening to everybody else. I'm asking you to do this for me now. Repeat back to me. What did I just ask you? Okay, let's go and do it. At the end of the fight, the handlers come to me and go, Orlando, what happened? I'm like, he wasn't listening. I didn't have his ear. Everything we wrestled wasn't listening. So what do you think about the fighter? I'm like, he's a good fighter. He had an off night, but I think maybe, sometimes if you change trainers, because a trainer can be numbing sometimes to a fighter's ear. But if you give him a new trainer, then all of a sudden, everything is okay. They'll listen a little bit better because it's fresh, somebody fresh. So at that point, in order for me to save the handlers money, their fighter, I chose to step away.
Wow.
I stepped away because the fight before was kind of leading towards this, but it wasn't this bad. And this fight was just that bad. And then the fighter, and I was right. And I was right. The next fight, even though it wasn't at the level that I had, with him and the opponent, was at a lesser level, half of what we went through. He listened. He was okay. Everything was great. They called me up. The handler, Orlando, you were right. Thank you so much. And blah, blah. I'm like, yeah. So you got to know when to step away. You got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them.
It's got to be hard to step away, especially if it's a really good fighter, right? I mean, if you have a very
Yeah.
talented fighter, but you go, you know what? He's just not listening anymore. I got to step away. I mean, that's got to be really hard to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. It's hard to step away, but it's best to step away because you'll do better, to step away. I mean, and I'm talking about a fighter that I have had done probably 4 or 5 fights with,
Yeah.
and every fight we're doing better and better and better and better. And he was brought to me because pretty much, he was lost athletic ability, but he was just, lost as far as, the pressure fighting, how to really bring the heat, how to win fights convincingly, how to provoke the other fighter. He wasn't doing that. So when they brought him to me, I showed him that. We put a lot of work in together. But in 2 fights, I lost him. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I had a talk with him. I said, "What do you think about?" And then he goes, "Whatever you think, coach." He told me, "Whatever you think." At that moment, I'm like, "Okay, that's what I think. That's what I think." So you know what? Still friends today. Everything's cool. Everything's business.
Right on.
I mean, business, and friendship is friendship. But we're good. We're good. It's just sometimes you got to know when to walk away.
I think that helps you maintain integrity too as a trainer. If you're forced to stick with every single fighter you have, because there's a fear of losing a potentially good fighter. Guys aren't going to really believe you when you say like, "Hey, if this doesn't work out, then we got these are the boundaries." You can't set boundaries if there's nothing to cut it off from. So I think as a trainer, you almost need to be able to establish when it's not going well that you can make that cut. Is what it looks like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you get a lot of respect for that. You get a lot of respect for that because you're walking away from money, but money isn't everything. Money you can make back, but your reputation, it's hard to make back. So by doing that, you're you know, you're not you have your integrity and you're not putting yourself in a situation that it could get worse than what it's been leading up to getting. So you got to read, see the writing on the wall. This is a condition where like it was getting worse and worse. And at that point, it was best for me and it was best for the fighter.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I do that with other fighters. I've had one more case I had similar to that where I said to the handler, I said, "Hey, I said it's not working. I can't guarantee my work." He says, "Orlando, one more fight. Do this one fight." And I'm like, "Okay, okay." Did that one fight. Everything worked out beautifully, and then I went my way, and he went his way.
Wow.
But hey, bad fighters can make a good trainer look bad, and there's good fighters that make a bad trainer look good. And then there's this, I mean, not to say that's always the rule because it really isn't. Um, but you got to have that connection. You got to have the chemistry, the vibe of who you're training with. Because if you don't have the chemistry, you don't have the vibe, and you're not, both of you are not one because you have to become one. You have to trust him and he has to trust you. You got to put your hands in the fire for him and he's got to go to the fire for you. So if you don't have that, listen, it's a guessing game. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. When you're climbing to the top, and when you're dealing with the top of the food chain, there's no room for error. You got to be sound, solid, strong, together. You got to be one. Like I said, the training has to be the best you've done leading up until this fight. And then the fight has to be executed. It's like that's the only way it can work. There's no guessing work in this. You can't guess. You can't hope. There's no hope like that. No. Hope is that you hope that things will turn out the way they're supposed to based on what you put into it, all the hard work you did. That's the hope, that you hope that we can duplicate this in the fight. That's
Hell
it.
yeah.
But you got to know that you did the work. You did the work in the gym because what you don't do in the gym, you're not going to do in the fight. And what you do in the gym, you got to do in the fight. That's my saying. And I also say that punches aren't vitamins. None should be taken. I should patent it, by the way.
So what you're saying now kind of goes back to what you were saying before. If a fighter comes to you and goes, "Oh, I don't need to spar hard. I'm going to fight hard when the fight comes." It's kind of bullshit, right? I mean, it kind of sounds like that would be bullshit, right? I mean, they would
Well,
have to.
if he's a beginner, I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. But if I can do research and see that he's won, a lot of fights with the way he is, and I can talk to, I can talk to the manager, I can talk to, in some cases, even a brother, or sisters come up to me and said to me, "Hey, this is the way he is." And they come with him. And they said, "Coach, just want to give you a little insight. This is the way he is, but he's a real dog in the fight. He's not a
Yeah,
sparring guy." It turns out to be true. Turns out to be true. And
that's
there's other cases that turns out not to be true. But if he's a beginner and he tells me that, I'm telling him, no, it's not going to work. Either you're going to do what I say and we're going to do it my way, or else it's not going to work. But
that's
if they're
crazy.
experienced, if they're an experienced fighter and I've seen their fights and I know they're a dog of a fighter, I'm like, okay, all right.
I didn't realize you could you'd kind of get that intel from people close to them. I mean, obviously the manager will tell
Yeah,
you stuff, but then the siblings, that's a totally different degree of getting to know
yeah,
this
well,
guy.
rare cases now.
Yeah,
Don't expect everybody to do that. Don't go looking, as a trainer, don't go looking for, I don't want
yeah,
any of the trainers to think they go looking for inside information. No. It's just a couple of cases where the family said, "Hey, at first he's a little bit hard to deal with." And it was a good fighter.
yeah.
At first, he's a little hard to deal with, but in time he'll comply. He'll work with you and everything. He's just like, this is the start because he's had this experience, something to that effect, because they care about him,
Yeah.
so they want to be helpful. And you know what? It turned out to be true. It worked fine. The guy was a dog in the fight and not good at sparring. And it's like, why? He just wasn't interested in sparring. And I've had that twice
Wow.
in my long career.
And you know, I
Yeah,
think
two
you
cases.
you probably can see all the indicators from your experience. You can tell, you can recognize a pattern of a guy who you're like, oh, I've seen this before. I know what his disposition is. It's not necessarily as bad as it looks at first sight. And we meet people like that too. I've worked with people who everyone says, oh, this person, they have a terrible attitude. You're not going to want to da da da. And then after I get to know them, I'm like, it came across that way, but no, this person's actually, they're here to work. You know, they've got a good attitude. It's just they have a,
Yeah,
their exterior is this, so it comes across that
true,
way, you know.
true. Yeah, yeah, of course, same,
Now,
same.
one thing I've heard you say several times, and I pretty much understand it, but I really want to dive in a little bit more. Is you said you've talked about fighters being able to provoke the other guy. When you say provoke the other guy, what does that really mean?
Provoke is when you pressure fight them. I got that from Spanish. In Spanish is provocar. Provocar means to provoke them, force them to go back. You know, force them to fight off their heels, back them up, corner them. That's what provoking. Take chances, you know, you know, make risky maneuvers. If I feel that the other fighter that I got to fight it with a great chin, with good defense, and the other guy might be a little bit better of a boxer, but he likes that he has a very low knockout ratio. We will provoke them to fight on the inside, corner them. Some fighters you don't want to corner. You don't want to corner them because they're just stronger than you are. So when I do, look, everything's a freaking study. I'm not going to give you away all
Yeah.
my secrets,
No,
but
no, 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 no. Yeah.
some fights, no, no, I know. Some fighters, you want to stay away from for so many rounds, and then you jump them, or then you provoke them, or then you pressure them. Other fighters, you pressure them early, and then then it goes your way. The latter part, it's all a hustle, and you just got to you do research. You got to study who you're fighting. Just like the NFL, like the
Yeah.
basketball, the NBA, they gotta watch how they're playing, what moves are they making. You got to do a lot of research. It's just not
100%.
like going to the gym and then sit back. That like the old trainers, some of the old trainers you do, they sit back, they tell you what to do one time, and your workout is the same every day. Every day is the same, and all they do is put the gloves. They glove you up. Some fighters, some trainers will glove you up. Uh, you know what to do, and then that was it. That was it. And then you go into the fight like that. Nowadays, it's so challenging. It's so much competition that you got to stay on top of the competition. You got to be ahead of the curve because it's just like it's gotten like that. There's so much there's so much research that people can do to see where you're working out at, how you're training, how you're looking, who you're sparring with. I keep all that a secret, which a lot of trainers do. It's nothing that's uncommon, but you want to take your steps and make your moves, very very quietly and in silence, so nobody can anticipate what you're doing or you don't want to wake them up. You want to let them sleep or think that things are the way it seems to them, and not wake them up so they can train a little bit harder, run a little bit more, or get better sparring than what they got. But it's
That's,
tough. It's a lot of competition.
and that's where it gets really interesting because it's a chess match. It's a lot like poker. You're playing hands all the time, and sometimes you
Mhm.
bluff. Sometimes you have a great hand and you don't want anyone to know it. Um, Social media, in my opinion, too, a lot of guys will give up a lot of their secrets without realizing it. They're sort of posting their workouts, and they also could make it look like they're not working out as hard as they are and totally deceive the other person. I mean, there's so many ways to sort of play that
Well,
hand.
we know one recently. Now that you mentioned that he posted on social media, and he's you call him a star, as the star of boxing. He posted on social media that he wasn't working out. He's working out at home.
Right.
That he was that it turns out where did this come from? He, it seems like it was all a setup because you can't go through a training camp like that and do nothing and just go out drink beers and party and then all of a sudden put on the kind of performance that you did on that one night. And you and I know what fight I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
you could say who it is because I think it's so well known. Everybody knows
Yeah,
what he did.
Ryan.
It's Ryan Garcia.
Yeah,
Yeah, he came to the weigh-in
yeah.
with a bottle of beer. One of the strangest things I thought, he's a wild card just in general. You do not know what you're going to get with Ryan Garcia, and then he's
No.
also playing games on top of it and just deceiving everybody. I thought, to be totally honest, I was laughing when I watched that fight because I just thought it was so outrageous the way he led up to it. I bought it. I was like, this guy This poor kid needs, he needs help. He's drinking. He's not taking his training
Right.
serious. Turns out,
Yep.
nope.
Yep. Yeah.
um,
What a shocker. Everybody bought it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
hook, line, sinker, 100%.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Without giving away your secret sauce, how many adjustments? I'm just thinking about this, like in fight adjustments. How many adjustments would you make in a 12 round fight? And how much is that predicated on the other guy's adjustments?
Well, a lot, a lot. The way it works is, you can't. There's no number. You can't put a number on it to say two adjustments, one, three, four. No, you can't. You can't put a number on it. The way it works is you study your opponent. Once you study your opponent, you see what it is that you want to do, that you think he's vulnerable. You want to see you see the holes maybe in his armor that you can strategically place certain shots, or that you can move him a certain direction where he can't fight. Or there's a lot of the things that you may see, and then you work on that in the gym. Just if in case it needs to be, put into play. Now, there may be the case where, we go into the fight with this plan. We start at the fight. First round is a feeling out process where, you just want to check his speed, you check his power, the holes in his armor, his footwork. Can he work one way? Can he work the other way? You know, all of that. You check it. Now, after that, then you start putting into play, your strategy. Now, based on your strategy, if it works or what part of it doesn't work, then at the rest period, you come up with an adjustment. This is what I think we should do. Blah blah blah. Do this. Don't do that. And just a couple of one or two, instructions that you give your fighter. Then he'll go back out there. The opponent may make an adjustment in the round to the adjustment you made. Or when he goes back to the corner, we could get the best of him in that round. Then he goes back to the corner. They make an adjustment to what we've been doing.
Yeah.
Now, once they make the adjustment to what we've been doing, and at that moment, we comes back to the corner, depending on how much we need to change, we'll make an adjustment to that adjustment. And at some point, somebody is not going to be able to make an adjustment, and then it'll be checkmate. There's a lot of reasons for not making the adjustment. It could be that they're cut, they're gassed out, they're not fast enough, they're not strong enough, or they didn't think that the person, the fighter they were going to be fighting was going to be, that overwhelming. So that's another scenario. All of that goes into play. But it's all about adjustments. Who gets stuck not making the adjustment.
You
It's a hustle.
you described chess literally in the process of adjust to the adjustment, but also constantly trying to establish yourself with that next step. So if you're like, okay, wait, I actually have control here, you probably
Right.
carry that on. But that is so fascinating. It really is. It's human chess, and it also involves levels of it's poker, it's playing hands, it's. I mean, there's just so many factors more though to boxing than chess. There's human ability and speed and power and IQ. It's such a fascinating. It's a
And there's
fascinating
levels
game.
to it. Yeah, and there's levels to it. There really is. And it gets not harder. It doesn't get harder. At this point, I can't say in my career it gets harder. It just gets more challenging, more stimulating. The harder the fight, the bigger the purse, the bigger the audience, the better the opponent. That's stimulating because that's what really, I mean, it's all about getting tested. It's all about getting tested and to a degree proving a point.
Hell yeah!
Really.
I'll leave you one
Yeah.
last question. I'll let you run. If you have, and yeah, I think you might have said this earlier, but if you had one slogan, I know I keep this banner. This was Emmanuel Stewart's, and I took it because I look up to him, and I love the banner and all the quotes on it. If you have a banner, or if you don't have a banner, and you were to put one up, what would the saying be to sort of exemplify what you're bringing to your fighters, or what your most common saying is?
I think right off the top of my head would be what you do in the gym is what you do in the fight. And what you don't do in the gym, you're not going to do in the fight. That's it. That'd be the best thing. I mean, it's a short little piece that says a lot. If you can't do it in the gym, you're not going to do it in the fight. And if you don't do it in the fight, it's because you didn't do it in the gym. That's pretty much it.
And punches aren't vitamins. You don't got to take so
Punches
many.
aren't vitamins. None should be taken.
Awesome, Orlando. Thank you
But
so.
that's a Spanish saying, by the way. Punches aren't vitamins. Los golpes no son vitaminas. Ninguno se debería tomar.
Oh,
That's a Spanish saying. But I just translated. Punches aren't vitamins. None should be taken. It sounds better in English, actually.
I mean, it's smoother when you say it in Spanish, but that's because maybe for me it's just a foreign, well, it's more a foreign
Yeah.
language. But thank you so much, Orlando, man. This was an absolute pleasure. I've learned so much. You know, the reason I do this is I want to get the opportunity to document the best minds of boxing and what everybody does so uniquely, and your ability to not only explain it but to really go into the details and the nitty gritty. It's meant a lot to me, man. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time and thanks for doing this with me.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, man.